swimming in an ocean of foam. And I don't mean the white stuff that blows up on beaches in Port Macquarie. I mean free, open access medical education, or Meducation. I'm joined by Tanya Johnston to present to you how you can use foam in your practice. I'd like to say thanks to Tim Leuenberg, who presented a terrific talk at the Paramedics Australasia International Conference in Adelaide, and shared his PowerPoint slides from that talk. I've shamelessly stolen a number of his images and themes, and in the spirit of foam, I'm sharing them back with you. So you can download this PowerPoint, I'll give you the link at the end, and feel free to deliver it and share it and change it and make it better. So what is FOAMed? As I said, it's free open access medical education. And the idea was that in 2012, a couple of guys named Chris Nixon and Mike Cadigan from Australia were sitting in a Dublin pub over a pint of Guinness and decided that they were the first ones to actually coin the word FOAM, free open access medical education. And it's become a phenomenon since then. And it's not just one thing, it's a whole group of things. So free open access medical education uses social networking, uses Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, Google+, and Pinterest to share medical information to communities of practice all around the world. So what kind of things are shared? Well, you can have talks, slide sets, PowerPoint presentations, podcasts, images, x-rays, videos, journal articles, just about anything you would normally access for your continuing professional development, but it's done over social media, often through Twitter now, and displayed on various different forms of media from, as we mentioned, LinkedIn or YouTube, but also from the traditional things like online journal articles. The plan today is to speak to you about how in your practice you can use it, whether you're a clinician, an educator, or a researcher. So I'm going to pass it now over to Tanya to speak to you about how clinicians can use foam.
Thanks, Joe. So anyone listening out there is probably a clinician, as we are, and I've got some bad news for you. Half of what you learn as a clinician to use in your practice, unfortunately, is just plain wrong. Now, that's not because it's wrong, but because by the time we learn it to use it, the information's just too old. So there's a famous quote by Joe Lex, which is common now in the foam community. And Joe Lex was an emergency physician who presented this at an emergency conference back in 2012. And what Joe said was, if you want to learn how we practiced medicine 5 years ago, you'll find that in a textbook. If you want to know how we practiced medicine 2 years ago, read a journal. If you want to know how we practice medicine now, go to a conference. If you want to know how we're practicing medicine in the future, use FOAMed. What is really valuable about foam is that it can be used offline. So it's asynchronous, and of course we've mentioned that it's education. So what does that all mean? Well, what that means is you can access this information, as Joe had mentioned, whether it's podcasts or YouTube or on Twitter, you can access it anytime that's convenient for you. And you can take it with you and keep it with you, and you can go over it at a time that's convenient for you. And the value of that is that although you're by yourself doing that, you're part of a community, part of a large community of people who has accessed and made available that same information. An excellent analogy of what is available on the internet now as far as our continuing professional development goes is drinking from a fire hose, and you'll see that in the image here. So this gets used quite a bit in the foam community when talking about how much information is out there and how difficult it can be to access it. So, and to actually filter through and decide what would be valuable for you. So an example would be in 2013, Medline added over 700,000 new citations, if you can imagine. And if only 1% of those were relevant to your practice, and imagine you read 2 papers per night, you'd still be 10 years behind where you need to be as far as learning all the information you would need for your practice. So what foam does is it acts as a filter. There's all those folks online who are going through the information and filtering through it and distilling it down into what is most valuable for you. And that is one of the magic, I guess that's the magic of foam. So here's a few sites that we use, foam sites that we use as emergency practitioners, and you'll see there on research, there's some on research, on 12 lead ECGs, Kangaroo Island, we already put a shout out to Tim Leuenberg there, and a variety of ones that we find valuable, and they're nice ones to start with. There are also ones that are dedicated to nursing, so that would be FOAN, F-O-A-N, for nursing education, and an example here would be for mental health, and there are other interest groups like for pediatrics and other specialty areas as well. Just an example of how I've used foam in my practice. You can see here that I sent out a tweet back on October 10th about pre-hospital medication dosing errors. And the reason I did that is I teach a pediatric postgraduate subject, and a number of my students follow me on Twitter. So I was able to use an app called QXMD, which goes through a number of articles that are printed out there and or I guess I should say published out there, and I came across this one that I thought would be really valuable. So instead of all those students having to go through all the articles that are available, I was able to find this one, which was very pertinent to discussions that we were having, and send it out on Twitter, and then they could go themselves in their own time again and look at that research themselves. So those are just examples and a little bit of detail of how you as a clinician can use foam. I'm just going to pass it back over to Joe to talk about how to use foam as an educator.
Thanks, Tanya. And as Tanya mentioned, she's an educator, as am I at university, and we like to get information out to our students, and they live in the digital world, so we've got to find innovative ways to be creative and find ways to get them education. So we use social media, which is not unlike what a lot of you use as educators yourselves. A lot of different things out there that we can engage with social media, and this is what students are using. And not only students in universities, students in high schools, middle school, and even younger than that are using social media to learn. So Twitter's in the classroom, blogging is out there to share and connect, create and inspire. Facebook is partly used for education, and as we know, anybody who's tried to figure something out at home improvement projects or anything else, YouTube has everything. So we can use the power of the internet and all these social media aspects to be good teachers, to be good educators, whether it's a university educator or a clinical educator that has a student that you want to share some information with. So I'll give you an example of what I've done. So I still work on the road as a paramedic, and a few weeks back, actually around November 11th, I had a really interesting patient that was very, very sick. And the patient responded incredibly well to basic interventions, a little bit of IM and IV adrenaline, and non-invasive positive pressure ventilation. And that got me thinking that I don't necessarily reinforce this enough with my students. I don't reinforce the basics as much as going to the more advanced stages. So I went online and I sifted through some of my favorite foam sites, and I found Life in the Fast Lane, which is Mike Cadigan's site, and he's got had a great presentation up there about non-invasive ventilation with a lot of pearls, and I learned a lot from it. So I tweeted this out to my students. This got out into the community, and not long later, I found another tweet about using ketamine for asthmatic patients. So as you can see, something that started with my clinical experience, added a little bit of foam academia to that, and it got quite advanced, talking about how to give ketamine, for example, for intubated asthmatic patients. So this is a way that education can use foam. And what we want to do is get people out there engaging in conversation. So they started online, they might tweet back and forth, they might retweet somebody's message that they like, they might engage in a little bit of conversation online, but hopefully that will manifest itself as communication that starts to happen in the corridors of the hospitals or on the ambulances or in the units. Because when we engage in information and when we interact, it accelerates our learning. So we want to make sure that we're putting out lots of messages and getting people to see things a lot of different times so they can create a conversation. Because those conversations reinforce good practices. So not only as a clinician and an educator, but as a researcher, we can use foam. And both Tanya and I are doing PhDs, and both of us have started to use foam to gather research data. One of the things that I've used is web-based network sampling. And this is an actual sampling technique that's up in the journals, and it's what I've used to get my information out to the people that I want to attract to complete a survey. So what I did is I developed a survey in SurveyMonkey, and I put it out on Twitter to some specific hashtags. Now the hashtags are specific groups, sort of like keywords, of people that are interested in certain areas. So my studies are in remote paramedicine and industrial paramedicine. So I wanted to attract those people. And then I went onto LinkedIn and I found some communities of practice on LinkedIn that are dealing with remote and industrial paramedicine, and I posted my survey link up there. So this attracted people that I wanted to engage in my survey from across the country that I would have never been able to find without using the internet. So this is one way we can use foam for research. Another really interesting thing that Twitter just added is a poll. So I wanted to play with the poll one day, and this is actually a very new feature of Twitter. And I just put a hashtag out there for all paramedics, and that's the hashtag paramedics. Are you using hashtag foam, which is the foam community, as part of your continuing professional development? And it only goes up for 24 hours. The polls are only open for 24 hours. And I have about 400 followers, and 68 of those followers voted, and 82% yes and 18% no. Now, this isn't scientific validated research, and certainly there's a bias because I'm using foam to get the survey out there, but it's interesting, and it shows you the power of using these communities for research. Now, Tanya's doing research in paramedic identity, and she's in the early stages, going through the literature right now and trying to flesh out some of her questions, and she put it out to the community as well, saying that she's investigating paramedic identity in Australia, Canada, and the UK. And what words describe paramedic identity? And she was getting responses from all over the world to help her frame her thinking about paramedic identity. And then this led into conversations about paramedic registrations and the differences between paramedics and other health professionals. So as you see, she's been engaging in conversation with the community and helping her form her research concepts. Now, are there downsides to FOAMed? Well, some will say that there's no peer review process. But wait a minute. FOAMed is actually peer-reviewed better than anything else because it's getting people that are experts in the field that are doing the practice every day to collate the information for you, filtering it, and providing instant feedback, critique, and criticism if something's wrong. So if I put a tweet out that was incorrect, it would be immediately responded to by somebody who knows it is incorrect. So peer review is actually happening faster in FOAM than any other process of peer review out there. Now, the other thing that's interesting is that even though this has only been around really since 2012, there's already academic papers identifying ways to use FOAM effectively. And it's providing even checklists on how to determine which are the good blogs and which are the good podcasts from the poor ones. Tim Leuenberg, who we've mentioned before, has put a paper out on how rural emergency medicines and rural medicine doctors and rural doctors can use FOAM to help their practice. So they can learn from the metropolitan doctors and the specialists and use their practice in rural and regional areas. And that's fantastic. So this is in the peer-reviewed literature talking about how FOAM, the social media phenomenon, can be used in practice. Now, how can you start using FOAMed? This is the simplest part of this presentation, probably the most important part. The first thing you need to do, and probably you're doing it already, is find contents that you like. Go to the different web pages. We've given you some, and I've provided a series of links at the end that you can take a look at and find good information. There's something called RSS, and RSS is Rich Site Summary, often called Really Simple Syndication, and all that does is allows you to subscribe to different web pages. So Tanya and I subscribe to the MCRIT page, and what happens is Scott Weingart, who's an emergency physician and critical care physician, will post different things on his web page, and when he does, we get an alert that he's put something new up there. So we're always getting reminders that there's new stuff on his web page. So you can subscribe to RSS. The other thing is go to the iTunes store and listen to podcasts. There's a ton of different podcasts for various different clinicians, medicine, nursing, paramedicine, allied health, and you can download one at a time, take a listen, and see if it engages you. Some of the presenters are exceptional, some are pretty boring, but you'll find something that you like guaranteed. And the best way and the easiest way, the most cost-effective way and time-effective way is to get on Twitter. Now, this might sound funny. You might think this is too trendy, this is too hip, this is too young, but this is really important. All you need to do is go online and get a username. My username is @AckerJoe. So you get your own username, which is unique to you, and you can start using hashtags. So you can put hashtag FOAMed or hashtag PhoneEd and start looking at those sites to find out specifically what's happening. Now, let me give you an example of the power of this. So as I mentioned earlier, we learned a lot about FOAM at a recent conference down in Adelaide at Paramedics Australasia in 2016. Now, at that conference, they announced the 2016 conference, which is going to be in Auckland. So this is still almost a year away. It's November 17th to 19th, 2016. They've got a hashtag. It's hashtag Paramedics Australasia International Conference 2016. And already this has got over 6,000 tweets of information. 6,000 people have tweeted about this conference that isn't happening for another year. There's 1,400 people following it, and there's 6,200 likes. So Twitter is incredibly important for getting messages out there and for engaging a community of like-minded people. You can start small. All you need to do is find a few Twitter people that you want to follow and follow them. I follow a fellow named Min Lee Kong, who's a flight doctor up with the Royal Flying Doctor Service in Queensland, and he tweets a whole bunch of really interesting things that I like. So I follow Min. You could follow Cheryl Prescott. She's an Australian nurse educator, and she puts a whole bunch of great information about ECGs and simulation up on her tweet site. And there's another guy, Jesse Spur, and we showed you his picture at Inject Orange, which is a PhoNed site, free online nurse education. And again, he provides a whole bunch of information via Twitter that might be interesting to you. So you might start following a few, and then you might follow a few more, and then you find a few more, and pretty soon you've got a huge community of social network followers that are doing a lot of this work that Tanya spoke about earlier. They're going through all the literature, all the videos, all the ECGs, filtering it, and putting it onto their Twitter sites that you can link to and follow. Now you might unlink people, and that's okay. It's not like defriending somebody on Facebook. It's completely fine to stop following somebody if you don't value the information they have, because this is about your professional development, and this provides opportunities for you to grow as a clinician. So, hopefully over the last 15 minutes or so, we've talked to you and shown you the light that free open access medical education is a great concept. It's something that you can engage in. And if you get to hashtag FOMED, free open access medical education, you can start the conversation with your colleagues. So my advice to you is just do it. If you have questions, please send them to us. We've got emails, Twitter, and Facebook, and all kinds of different ways to get a hold of us. And you can also go to our website, paramediccpd.com, where we've got this presentation, the PowerPoint presentation for you to download, as well as a whole bunch of links to some great FOMED sites. Now, I'll admit that they're emergency medicine, paramedic related, but they'll get you started into some really fascinating things. There's a bunch of links here that you can start with, including some nurse links, paramedic links, critical care physician links, and the references, as I mentioned, that are increasing the validity of FOMED in the community. So thanks a lot for your time today, and I hope you enjoyed it.